After the success of the first Witcher game in 2007 and the release of the Enhanced Edition in 2008, one thing was on everyone's mind: the 2007 to 2008 financial crisis. And to cope, people were imagining what a sequel to The Witcher would look like, including CD Projekt Red. But another thing on their mind was porting The Witcher 1 to consoles. This was supposed to happen in 2009 with The Witcher: Rise of the White Wolf, with a completely new combat system and a whole new engine. But in the same year that it was to be released, development was suspended by CD Projekt over disagreements with the game's developer, Widescreen Games. Man, they had a badass cinematic trailer and everything. Despite this, the development on The Witcher 2 continued, and eventually the public got a look at some trailers and early gameplay. Very early.
Unfold.
You'd best stay with me.
Princess, under any other circumstances I'd stay, but this is important. Besides, I'm broke.
Characters' reactions that will range from the poignant to the comic.
What was that? Oh shit! This time it ain't my fault.
So early that it still used the Witcher 1 combat system, and Geralt looked like this. But don't worry, the final version of him looks like this. Oh. Bro, is that a fucking dragon? Finally, in 2011, The Witcher 2 Assassins of Kings was released to the world to critical acclaim, and 1 year later the Enhanced Edition released to both PC and Xbox, making this The Witcher's first time on console and last as a PC exclusive. The game was a far cry from the first one. The graphics only a modicum of have been replaced by some of the most breathtaking visuals in gaming up to that point, and the weird rhythmic combat system has been replaced by a more typical slash and roll one. All in all, it's hard to fathom that these two games are by the same studio, and that they came out back to back, with no other games in between. The Witcher 2 has been heralded as being better than the first one in almost every way, and at face value that would appear to be the case. However, my senses and analytical abilities are superior to that of a normal man, especially after consuming a couple of potions. Like the first one, The Witcher 2 opens up with a breathtaking cinematic that helps set up the events of the story. In the first, it depicted Geralt's fight with the Striga from the first short story of the first book, The Last Wish, and in the second game it depicts the assassination of a king. Wait. Yo! An assassination at the hands of a Witcher. At the end of the first game,
Oh. Spoilers.
Geralt saves the king of Temeria, Foltest, from the hands of an assassin, who after Geralt kills him, turns out to be a fellow Witcher. After that, Geralt became Foltest's bodyguard of sorts. The game opens up the same way as in the first game, with Geralt running through a forest, with voices calling out his name in the distance. But this time he's shirtless.
Oh, nigga!
And now we're in prison, with Geralt chained up, still shirtless. Oh. Geralt gets taken to interrogation by a homeboy wearing the dirty towel from a gym bag. Apparently, Geralt has not been doing his bodyguard gig too well, because he has murdered King Foltest. And Towel Boy, whose name is Vernon Roach, wants to know what happened leading up to the assassination. Here the player is presented with the option of telling the story in whichever order they please. If they want to skip right to the juicy bits, or go through everything, it's up to them. This is great for players replaying the game. A lot of so-called replayable role-playing games suffer from having extremely long and slow openings, that on the first playthrough are great, but on the second, third and fourth, yeah, no. But in my playthroughs of this game, I have not once skipped a single bit of the prologue, because it's honestly one of my favorite parts of the entire game. I chose to tell Roach everything in the correct order, so here we go. Geralt wakes up in bed, shirtless, and the game immediately kills the mood by showing off a naked Triss sleeping next to Geralt. It especially kills the mood by rendering all of my cock-blocking of Triss in the first game pointless, practically forcing Geralt and Triss to be together, like a child making two dolls kiss. Thankfully, a soldier shuts all of this down by being a peeping Tom and telling Geralt to get moving because the king wants him by his side. Thanks for your service. Geralt gets dressed and talks with Triss about what has occurred since the first game. They are in a military camp outside of a castle that Foltest is laying siege to because of some dispute with his bitch about who gets the kids in the weekends.
Stupid war. Could have been such a beautiful morning.
A war can never be stupid when waged by your king.
They've cleared the forests, they're pillaging nearby villages, and they'll soon be murdering each other en masse. Why? Because Foltest's having a spat with the mother of his bastard twins. This is a really stupid war, Triss.
And since Geralt has become Foltest's new boy toy, he gets drafted in this war too.
You ready to join the army, nigga?
Nigga.
Damn it!
They of course also discuss the Witcher Assassin, how the information could affect Geralt if it got out to the public and the king, that a Witcher was behind it all, something about a dragon spotted nearby, and lastly, Geralt's dream and how it may reveal something about his past. Outside, Geralt is met by a bustling army camp, a castle in the distance, and trebuchets firing at it. The presentation in The Witcher 2 is on point, and CD Projekt is basically just showing off how far they have come since the first game, and that sentiment is carried throughout the entire game, but especially here in the prologue. There are so many things to see and interact with. It's quite a lot to take in coming straight from the first game. You poke around a bit, do a bit of gambling, which hasn't changed from the first game. But now you can also do a half-assed arm wrestling minigame. Just outside your tent you run into some people from Geralt's past, and your interaction depends on your book knowledge, and how much more you know than Geralt, who still suffers from video game protagonist syndrome. Finally, Geralt gets his ass moving, which is even fatter in this one, to Foltest, who is artistically explaining how ballistas work to some foreigners.
Black ones in my camp before a battle. What has the world come to?
Not to worry, dear viewer, Foltest is simply referring to these black-clad gentlemen called Nilfgaardians, referred to as black ones because of their attire, and sometimes because of their skin color. Enough racial tension, we have a castle to siege. Geralt and Foltest get in this huge wooden thingamajig, and Foltest gets his men pumped to get and inflict PTSD, and off we go and get a taste of The Witcher 2's new combat system. No more rhythmic clicking, now we're rolling for our lives. The developers have opted for a more active combat system instead of a turn-based one, and although I like the first combat, and I'm probably the only one, this new one isn't too bad. However, actually let's save this for later, we have war crimes to commit. Or prevent. Although this whole war is caused by a domestic dispute regarding the custody of children, it's still the least chaotic divorce I've witnessed. This is one of my favorite opening levels in all video games. The scenic background and location of the castle, fighting off hordes of enemies with some time for exploration, and going back and forth between this and the interrogation scene makes for so much engaging fun, unlike some other video game openings.
Hey, you're finally awake.
And also Foltest is just spectacular.
Look alive, men! Hail to the king! Where the hell are we headed? To battle! What the fuck do we want? Victory! This I like!
Almost makes me forget he impregnated his sister in the books. There's also a fucking dragon. Anyways, Geralt and Foltest get to his children, and Foltest really named his son Boosie.
No tears, Boosie. One day you'll be king, and kings do not weep.
Geralt is absolutely appalled by this and goes over by the window to enjoy the view, and then this happens.
Sire, let us pray.
They must look like the royal children they are.
They have your eyes, sire.
course, Geralt doesn't manage to catch the culprit. And if that isn't enough, he then gets himself framed for the murder. God damn it, Geralt. And now Geralt is here, getting interrogated shirtless by a man who just got out of the shower. But it's okay, he is impressed by your reasoning, so he decides to open your handcuffs and let you find your own way out. And that way out is a terrible big mistake. Let's not do this. Please God, no forced stealth section. I'm gonna let you go. Great. But the only way through is through the stealth section. A forced stealth section really makes a Witcher reconsider his options. What did you say was gonna happen, Roach?
They'll publicly gut you, skin you, and hang you.
Yeah, sounds better. But eventually Geralt does get through. And he catches a ride on the Towel Dude's boat, whose name, Vernon Roach, really doesn't sound good in English, CD Projekt Red, I'm not gonna lie. Anyways, he's the head of Temeria's special forces, and wants to help Geralt catch the assassin. So Geralt travels with him and his men down the Pontar River in search of the assassin, so he can be brought to justice and Geralt can clear his name. And get a hold of this new combat system. It's like watching a pig roll around in the mud. To be honest, the most notable thing about the combat is how different it is from the combat of the first game. But other than that, it's pretty similar to combat systems of other RPGs of the time. You hack and slash your adversaries, roll around in the mud a bit, and then come back for some more hacking and slashing, with some absolutely disgusting sound effects, and feedback that makes every click of your mouse button feel like a visceral assault of sharp steel through flesh. In a self-defense situation, of course. You have your normal attack, triggered by the left mouse button, but guess what, motherfucker, there's a heavy attack too. Click the right mouse button and let violence take over you. You can manually block now, and if you upgrade Geralt you can also parry and counter enemy attacks if you time them right, among so many other violent options. Geralt is still an unapologetic gang member and will throw gang signs at these ops. They aren't that different from the original signs, just a bit more satisfying to use and prettier to look at. There are no more fighting styles you can switch between like in the first, you will just have to figure it out yourself. There are plenty of different enemy types in The Witcher 2, a bit more than in the first, where a lot of the enemies look different, but pretty much require the same strategy for the most part. The Witcher 2 is good at keeping it fresh. Combat is fun, except when it isn't. This is the case with the backstabbing system, and fighting groups in small spaces. The Witcher 2 has a backstabbing system in which you deal double damage if you hit it from the back. And enemies can do the same to you. The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings? More like The Switcher 2, Asses of Kings. This all sounds nice and fair, and it would be if the hit scan in this game wasn't bonkers. It's especially bad when fighting enemies in tight spaces, which the game's movement system really wasn't made for. And this, coupled with the backstabbing system and often wild hit scan, makes for a not so bitching experience. I'll be the first to admit that I'm not the best at video games, but this combat has me fighting salvation in the bottom of a bottle. I especially hate fighting these fucking Wait, can I say this? These end monsters, fuck these guys, especially when they're in caves. Another thing I hate about the combat is how the game will randomly decide upon which long-range attack Geralt will use. Some of them are good and quick, and then others are slow and unremarkable despite the cool animation. And they leave you in a vulnerable spot, which is especially bad if the camera just so happens to lock on a random far away enemy while you're trying to fight off those close to you. And then it will have Geralt just jump right into the thick of the group so you can get passed around like a blunt by your enemy combatants. But despite all of this, combat is fun. Especially when you figure out how to use its brokenness to your advantage. All you need to do when facing a big monster is just to get to its back and backstab it so it gets stun locked, and then you can just keep going. And it works. This doesn't quite work for human enemies, but for the big monsters it does. It's a bit anticlimactic when a boss has this big introduction only to instantly eat shit in the most uneventful way possible. I mentioned it earlier, but the movement in this game wasn't made the way God intended. Geralt walks like he just finished his last walking lesson and got his license. The only time the movement is alright is when you're rolling, and even there, it's walking on a tightrope. Or should I say rolling. I was being attacked by a group of bandits during a quest, and it was right next to a loading area on the map, so I was rolling in and out of this and having loading screens interrupt everything, so be mindful of stuff like that as well. The Witcher lore puts a lot of emphasis on the importance that a Witcher prepares himself before battle by consuming various potions. You could call this pre-gaming, if you will. Please don't. In the first game you could drink your potions both inside and outside of combat, because sometimes you know what monster you're going after and sometimes you don't. But in Assassins of Kings you can only do so outside of combat, and if that isn't enough, you can't just consume them when walking around. You have to get Geralt down on his knees, and then you can get into a menu and select the potions you need. And this whole process takes way too much time, so it's especially important to know which beasts you're dealing with and remembering where they prowl, because as soon as you're in combat you can't use any potions whatsoever. You can still equip your sword with oils and runes in your inventory even in combat, which is weird because you'd think coating your sword in oil and carving runes into it would be way more impractical than simply taking out a little bottle and drinking from it. In fact, I do this all the time in real life. The sequel still includes the Witcher medallion mechanic that alerts the player to monsters and magic nearby, thankfully. You can make bombs that Geralt can throw at enemies, with different effects. Bombs are present in the first game as well, but weren't really that necessary, so you tend to forget that they're even there. But in The Witcher 2 I find them much more useful, especially against groups and bosses. You also need certain bombs for monster contracts, so you can blow up monster nests. You can also get throwing knives with Geralt, but I only really used those if I ran out of bombs. Like in the first one, you can upgrade Geralt in many ways and you can go for different type of builds. You can have a sign based build, or a sword fighting one, even an alchemy build, and I just love the upgrade menu and how it twitches. You're bound to die from a backstab of some rando the other side of the continent at some point, so I beg you, please for the love of the eternal fire, save your game. Because the autosave system in this game absolutely sucks. And not only that, you have to be extra good at managing your saves, because the game doesn't let you overwrite saves, and it doesn't delete any old autosaves either, and opts to instead just pile up saves until it crashes your game at random. I had saves going all the way back to 2018 up to today. It was so bad that the game crashed when I tried deleting saves in-game, so I had to open up the folder and delete them there. And this has been a common issue on PC since release. CD Projekt even has a statement regarding this on their site, but haven't fixed it in any way whatsoever. I mean, how do you fuck this up? Every game I've ever played, whether it's from the 90s, 2000s, 2010s or 2020s, they have all had normal save systems. The standard save system. The Witcher 1 has a standard one too, so why doesn't the second? The game is so well put together in so many places, but then it messes up stuff like this, and it's just baffling. It's like an early access indie game in AAA clothing. Everything you expect to be in a AAA title is there, along with the unpolished nature of an indie title. I know it's a video game, but The Witcher 2 really feels like one. The world isn't as open as it looks. There's a ton of seemingly accessible zones that just aren't. Walking through doors is extremely awkward and you have to place yourself just right to open them. And if a character opens a door in front of you and you try to follow through, well, you can't most of the time, and now you're just standing there like an idiot. Unlike in the first game where there was no animation, just an instant loading screen. And that game's world was more, or at least felt more open than this one, with wide open plains and areas and slightly less restrictive paths. It also didn't have ladders, and let me tell you, I hate ladders in video games, because mostly they're a reminder of how ladder technology has regressed since Half-Life 1. The Witcher 2 has a lot more stuff, and because of that a whole lot of more annoyances, like with the ladders and the combat system, but so much more. If the game played like it looked, it would be so close to perfect, because my god is it beautiful. The game is heavily stylized but pulls some realism just enough. Every area is unique and beautiful in its very own way. Well, maybe except for the Kaedweni camp, that one is kinda boring to be honest. You'll be walking through big ancient forests, filled to the brim with lush foliage, beaming with a green so pure, with the occasional monument and elven ruin, and of course there's the town and its harbor. You'll have the option of going to a dwarfish town, and CD Projekt really went for it when they designed this place. You have absolutely no misconception of who lives here, and it's great. And at the end of the game you'll go to an ancient city, a ruin long abandoned, very reminiscent of Roman ones, but still entirely its own. But my favorite location has got to be La Valette Castle from the start of the game. I'm a sucker for castles and medieval architecture, and this one scratches every itch I got. Every time I replay this game, I gotta stop at so many places at the castle to take it all in. Like this graveyard and its great view. And the chapel, oh the chapel. It's also just all the little details that make the world so memorable visually, and nothing is half-assed. The biggest thing holding the first game back visually were the character models, and I'm glad to say that this has been fixed in the sequel, for the most part. The models look great and the character design is outstanding. Character design in The Witcher 1, besides Geralt and the main cast, was very basic and forgettable, but the sequel completely flipped the script and created its very own visual identity. Every character has character, and Geralt especially. I love his default high-rise ponytail, his little stubble, and all available armor for him is gorgeous. The way CD Projekt went about designing Nilfgaard's style is just mwah, especially compared to Netflix's attempt. All armor is awesome in this game, and sorcerers and sorceresses look spectacular. The one thing the character design truly suffers from is male designer syndrome, and I think you all know what I mean. It's a bit childish, especially for a game that wants to be taken as seriously as this one. More on that later. But mostly it's just funny. However, no woman is as objectified as Geralt is. I swear the devs made his ass fatter in this one. There's also no female dwarves in the game, so when you get to the dwarven town it's literally world of gays. There's female trolls in the game, so why not female dwarves? Does this shit really get you bricked up, devs? The models are great, but the animation doesn't quite match. The way the characters move is a bit stiff and doesn't look that much better compared to the first game. The facial animation is more expressive than the original, but it still doesn't quite look right. All of this is way more noticeable when you have these beautiful models who inhabit such a picturesque world. It's uncanny. The low-grade graphics in the first game made all of this look normal, because it meets your expectations, but in this game, the contrast is huge. The stock animations during conversations are funny, but it's still better than two people standing completely still, like someone with not so high functioning autism. But despite all of this, the game looks unreal, and it has some badass, epic set pieces throughout. There's gonna be some spoilers here, so skip to this point, but bro, look at this shit. Holy shit. Bro, you fight a fucking dragon, look at this, whoa. And the dragon is actually a woman who can turn into a dragon. Or is it the other way around? Never mind, but no, you can't fuck the dragon despite there being a quest called Enter the Dragon. Sorry, Shrek fans. Although the graphics are great, they're not perfect and there's plenty of big and small graphical errors. Though nothing quite like this from the first game. If I had to describe the feeling of this game's story, it would be epic. While the first game is more personal, even though both games' stories are almost on the same scale, the experience of each is very different. The game starts with the assassination of a king and Geralt getting framed for it, and along the path you and him encounter even more kings besides the two of you, who are fighting over the Northern Realms' resources and future, and looming in the background is the Empire of Nilfgaard. Yeah, you're gonna learn all the names, don't worry. Kedwin, Redania, Timber. The Witcher 2 came out the same year as the first season of Game of Thrones, around the time that gritty, realistic, and politically intriguing fantasy started taking over the genre. Gone are the cute little woodland creatures of the first game, in exchange for overly long and serious political talks. The first game took after the short stories, that are more fantastical and fairy tale-like in nature, while The Witcher 2 takes after the saga, where it all becomes one big story instead of several smaller, slightly connected ones, and where there's a bigger emphasis on the political situation and events of the world. But even with all of that, the saga never forgot its fantasy identity. In The Witcher 2, however, the fantasy parts seem more like a backdrop to everything else, and yes, there are monsters and dragons, elves and dwarves, and yes, Geralt still shoots fireballs out of his hands. But unless it's something edgy like fantasy racism, it just feels like the game doesn't want to bother spending time properly developing it, and that a lot of it is just there to fill a quota. But there are some great fantasy moments in the game, like when Geralt has to take part in a never-ending battle between two spectral armies in order to get rid of a curse, or every moment involving a troll or a dragon. It's great, and I really wish this was more present in the game, and its plot. But that's not to say that the plot and story is bad. It's good, but it lacks the more fantastical elements of the series. But most importantly, it lacks the emotional connection and impact of previous entries. The sequel created and reintroduced some of the most memorable characters in the entire series, and they're all so interesting, fun, and cool, and the execution of the writing has improved a lot since the last game. And everything feels so much more natural, and yet the emotional connection just isn't as strong as in the previous game. I think all of the characters are cool as hell, but I just don't care about them the same way that I do with the characters of the first, even though a lot of them are in both games. The Witcher 1 is a long game and takes place almost entirely in Vizima and its surrounding area, and you spend a lot of time in each area with the same characters. And the game is really about stopping to smell the roses. It's a game that knows the importance of letting loose and having a bit of fun. Everything moves slowly and develops slowly, and because of that you're given time to fully appreciate everything. You end up developing a stronger bond to the world and its characters. Characters in the first game are also approached differently. In the first Witcher game, the characters are written to be down to earth and feel like actual people you could meet out in the world. And it achieved this despite the imperfections in the writing's execution. Meanwhile, the characters in the sequel are written to be more cool and witty, like characters in a video game. And that's another element in the sequel's writing that makes it harder to bond with its characters. The Witcher 2 is a smaller game in comparison to its predecessor, and takes place in 4 separate places. And while you spend a good amount of time in each area, you're gone off to the next one before you develop a real relationship to it. And the characters, with a few exceptions, all switch up, and in my opinion there isn't enough time spent with them. Outside of some main quests and the rare side quests, most time spent with them is going through all of the questions you can ask them outside of quests. And it's a shame because they're all great, and if given more time it could have been something quite special. The stars of the show are definitely Vernon Roach and Yorveth. They're the Witcher 2 versions of Siegfried and Yevon, Vernon representing humanity and Yorveth representing the non-humans. And like with Siegfried and Yevon, they both represent 2 extremes. Vernon being the commander of the Temerian Special Forces, who, of course, are racist, and Yorveth representing the terrorist group of the Scoia'tael, who, of course, are also racist. So again, Geralt is stuck between a racist and a racist. Vernon and Yorveth are 2 absolute lads, some absolute bros, and it's hard to choose between them, even though the game is objectively more fun if you choose to go with Yorveth. The Witcher 2 benefits by its shorter length, by being able to inject more meaningful choices. In the early part of the game, you're given the choice to either follow Vernon or Yorveth, and both give you completely different paths with different quests, locations and characters. And there's more choices and consequences in the game, but this is definitely the biggest one, and this is the biggest selling point of The Witcher 2, and one of the things repeated again and again in the game's marketing. The other thing is, this is a mature game for mature adults. Politics, violence, titties. Titties. Almost every interview, review, preview, or article will not stop mentioning how mature The Witcher 2 is, and that you're gonna need to put on your big boy pants in order to play it. And this is the game they're talking about.
My favourite type of magic, lesbomancy.
And it's true, this game deals with a lot of mature subject matter and themes, and has a very adult sense of humor. But when people call this game mature, what they really mean is that there is the occasional woman presenting nipple. And let me tell you, the way sex is handled in this game is anything but mature. It feels like it's written by a 13-year-old boy and not 30-year-old Gregor Shinishikevich from Warsaw. Some people find these things hot in a video game, but not me, because sure, if it were real women presenting nipples, I could get behind it. But these are all 3D models created by Gregor's friend Stanimir, awkwardly rubbing against each other, and yeah, no. The first game had some of this in the form of that cursed card collecting minigame, but in that game it was easy to avoid. In the sequel, it's, pardon my language, shoved down your throat at times, and you just have to sit there and look at the dev's wet dreams. The Witcher 2 wants so badly to be taken seriously, and yet it pulls stuff like this, and other things, and it just doesn't work. The Witcher is an inherently silly franchise that knew when not to take itself seriously, and also poke fun at itself and its characters. And all this helps support the serious and dramatic moments, and vice versa. But The Witcher 2 is so incredibly dry at times, and when it does crack jokes, it will sometimes play it way too cool so the joke ends up falling flat. The game can absolutely be funny, but these moments feel so disconnected from the rest of the game and its new identity. I think the devs took the categorization of The Witcher as dark fantasy a little bit too seriously. None of this is bad. It's a great story with even greater characters, but there were so many times when I had to remind myself that I was playing a Witcher game because it lacks the essence and atmosphere of the books and the first game. It feels a bit like the devs wanted to create an entirely new game, but chose to stick with The Witcher for marketing reasons. It's also just funny seeing everyone at the time acting like The Witcher 2 is the first game for a mature audience. The plot of the game is a bit complicated, and like with BioShock Infinite, the first impression is always the best. Because the more you replay the game, the more errors you notice, and generally just questionable execution in the writing. But in the bigger picture, it works. And what works especially is the Assassin of Kings, Letho of Gullet, the Witcher assassin that took Foltest's life in the start of the game. You and Geralt are not only motivated to follow through the entire story to clear Geralt's name, but to get to Letho and find out why Witchers are killing monarchs, and what his gym routine is and which potions he takes. You chase him the entire game and fight him in the middle of the game in a pretty challenging boss fight, some Witcher on Witcher action. At the end of the game he finally stops running, and you can just talk to him and ask him about everything, with the option of just ending it all in a final duel if you so wish. Or you can just go your separate ways. After everything that's happened in the game, having such a down-to-earth finale couldn't be more fitting. It's the calm after the storm. The entire game builds itself up to this moment, and along the way you've been met by these big and grand set pieces, only to be standing and talking in a courtyard with a natty bodybuilder. It's great because of the restraint, and even if you choose to fight Letho, the fight isn't any different from Geralt's and Letho's first fight, besides the fact that the player has gotten better now and knows what to do. Letho could have been a really stale and boring character, and on the surface he is, but the longer you play and the more you interact with him, the more that you find out that this just isn't the case, and that his cause is actually quite sympathetic. Besides being called The Witcher, the Witcher series doesn't have a lot of Witchers in it, because Witchers are basically on the endangered species list. So every time that you meet a fellow Witcher in the Witcher series, whether it's the books or the games, it's always something special, and the characters are always well written, and Letho is no exception. The Witcher 2 isn't as much of a sequel as it's an entirely new game, and while they share the same characters, world and ideas, they're not remotely close. The Witcher 2 isn't a traditional sequel. It doesn't build on the mechanics and quirks of the first game. Instead, it strips all of that down to the original fundamental idea and rebuilds it into something new. Same idea, different execution. And that's the same case with the soundtrack. The main idea, the main melody found in the original's music is there, but the rest has been reshaped into something grander and more epic, to reflect the story's new focus. The soundtrack is so different, but manages to stay rooted in its Witcher identity, mainly through its use of the Witcher's main melody, also found in the first game, and I wish the rest of the game was more like this. The Witcher 2 is a great game with engaging gameplay, an interesting story with multiple paths, and fantastic presentation with a beautiful art style and great graphics, but lacking in that special atmosphere and feeling that really makes The Witcher stand out, a problem it shares with the Netflix adaptation, but nevertheless a worthy and worthwhile sequel to one of my favorite games of all time.